Hello, everybody. Welcome to Overcoming Obstacles for Developing Exceptional Embedded User Interfaces. I hope everyone's been enjoying their time at the Embedded Online conference and have found a lot of really cool talks and interesting technologies to learn about. My name is Nik Schultz. I'm a field application engineer at Crank Software, and here I'm going to talk to you sort of about some of the challenges of developing exceptional embedded user interfaces. And I've spent a little bit of time in the industry and worked at a number of different positions. Before joining Crank, I worked at QNX on the automotive HMI team and built up reference designs with HTML5 and some other native graphics frameworks. Also, when I joined Crank, obviously I started working on customer projects with Storyboard, started training, switched over to the applications engineering role, and now I handle customer onboarding and evaluation and sort of come across a wide range of different questions and challenges in the embedded space. But despite what market you might be in, there's a lot of common constraints. So it's a sort of pretty interesting topic. Today's agenda, kind of going to go over a few things, the impact of UX on embedded devices, the challenge of the standard GUI development workflow, and then, overcoming obstacles with parallel workflow. And then we'll do a quick demo to see an example of this in action. So really what we're seeing today and what we're facing is, the challenge of ever evolving expectations. And this has been happening for a while now. Really, once smartphones entered the arena in terms of a commonplace device, all of a sudden the user experience expectations of products on the field have been elevated. Everybody has a phone in their pocket these days. They're all used to a high-end system with some of the latest UI trends and very performant hardware. So with that being, what everyone's used to, all of a sudden the projects in deeper embedded spaces are being compared to that. And whether it's fair or not, that comparison and that benchmark is going to impact how a user feels using your product. And it's a challenge, especially the way that, technology and hardware are constantly evolving these days. It means that you're not only considering the software side, but also the hardware, how the hardware can support what you're trying to do, and also the life cycle of the product on a particular piece of hardware in the future, and if you're going to make updates to it. So yeah, it's not easy by any stretch of the imagination. The other aspect too, and this is fairly common, but everybody needs something yesterday. Project deadlines are very, very tight. Resources are usually limited, and anytime you need to make changes or add new features or refine your product, that's very costly. And the later that happens in your development lifecycle, usually the more costly that change is. So decisions end up being made about whether a feature is going to be included, not necessarily because of it's the right feature or the right change, but will we make our budget? Will we hit our deadlines? So really the UI will make or break your product. As I mentioned before, since everybody has that experience with the high-end Android, iOS smartphones in their pocket, right off the bat, they're going to be comparing your device to the latest and greatest hardware out there. And, a lot of what they feel is going to be emotional. Some of this is, how they feel in their first few interactions with with your product, not so much, what does it do, but, how does it do it? Is the display smooth? Is it intuitive? Are the animations pleasing? Is it responsive and laggy? All of those different considerations. And, more often than not, we'll see that the most functional product, or maybe the most technically correct, may not always win out. And, it'll be the product that has, the nicest user interface, the smoothest user experience, or sort of more cutting edge design that will capture and grab the consumer's minds. So, you really need to take this into consideration, and you need to start designing products with this in mind. And the catch in this case is that, whenever, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but whenever you make changes and test and refine, the cost of that can be compounded and very, very expensive, either in a traditional financial sense or in a time sense. And this diagram here really explains the traditional development workflow that we see and still see in a lot of organizations and products. But, something that as you go down the path of, creating a design, implementing it, reviewing it, iterating, it happens in this serialized workflow. And the further you go, the more expensive those changes can be, the more decisions you've baked into your implementation, and, the tighter it might be, and harder it might be to bring those changes to market if you really discover something in testing at the 11th hour. And this is problematic. It doesn't, this workflow doesn't scale well with the constraints that we're seeing these days, and the tighter deadlines and the increasing expectations. So how do you do that, and how do you cope with it? Well, it seems simple enough to say it, but you need to separate the design and the iteration and the user experience testing from the development. And really what it means is this is all about embracing iterations. And you need the ability to come up with designs, start prototyping, building up concepts, demonstrations, then taking that next step and evaluating on your hardware. Putting that actual device or the evaluation board in front of someone and having them interact with it and seeing how they feel and what they think. And then take that feedback, iterate, test it and tune it, and, build it back into your development cycle. And to do this, you do need some specialized tooling that embraces this workflow. If you are working in a traditional, what I say is sort of a pure code framework, then this can become challenging. But if your tooling supports it and is built around the concept of iteration, then all of a sudden this is something that you can do fairly easily. And, what we do at Crank Software and how we've built up Storyboard is how we feel you should answer that challenge. And I'm going to switch over and quickly build up a quick sample for you, and then I'm going to change it and I'm going to do some iteration. And I'm hopeful that you guys can see the benefits of that, and really looking forward to showing it to you. So I'll just quickly pop out of here and jump into the tool. All right, so here we have an application that I've imported. It came in from a Photoshop file, but you could certainly do the same thing with a sketch file as well if you're on a Mac. And this application has 6 different screens. You can think of it kind of as a home automation application. It's got some thermostat, some settings screens, internationalization, a security panel, voice control, and weather. So kind of a standard UI that you might see on some of the more modern all-in-one security thermostat panels that are starting to come out. And from here, we always like to start adding some behavior into the application. And, the first thing that we might do is hook up some of these screens. So, he's got some nice navigation on the bottom. And you can see here this menu layer has a few different elements to it. But if I were to drag an element here, you can see that we're reusing it on every screen. So, we can leverage this and get a lot of work for very, very little effort. So I'll select our thermostat button down here. Actually, I'll start with weather, right click on that, add an action. And this is where we can map an event to a behavior in our application. So an action being, a touch, a timer finishing, an animation completing, something like that. And then an action being what we're going to visually see or represent or execute in the application. So we will start off with a touch event, combination of press and release on the same control. And then we will go to a screen transition. We will then select our destination. Because it's the weather button, we will select the weather screen. A bunch of different options here you can play with. I always like to start creating different directions based on what you select. So in this case, we'll move to the right and hit finish. And then in the actions panel down there, you can see our touch event triggers a screen transition, and it's on the weather control. We'll do the same thing for the thermostat. So we can go back, hit an action, touch, and you'll notice that the events you use more frequently get hoisted up to the top for convenience. Do another screen path, thermostat, and in this case, we are going to go to the left. Hit finish. So we have that nice back and forth. So if I simulate our application here, save our changes, you can see here we have transition to the weather, nice animated, and then back to the thermostat. And again, nothing overly crazy there, but we're able to import, test, and run, and you see some pre-existing behavior that comes in via the Photoshop file, all with a few clicks. So that's pretty powerful and pretty efficient right there. If we want to quickly wire up the last screen, so I can right-click, I'll copy that event binding, and I'll paste it onto the settings screen, and we'll simply update the properties here. So I will pick the security panel screen as well. So again, another quick save simulation. We've got our weather screen, our settings screen, and the other thing you'll notice is the buttons here have all been hooked up. So again, a little bit of diligence in the Photoshop file means that when we do the import, it comes in nice, quickly, and efficiently. So that's pretty cool. Next thing I always like to do is I always like to create an animation. And we have this nice scrolling menu layer. And if I expand that, there is a bunch of controls here, and they're all off screen right here. So you see the X property -290. So if I were to select them all, set that back to 0, you can see here we've got a pop-out menu that you can imagine slides in from the left when the user presses the hamburger button, the menu button in the top left corner. So I'm going to go ahead and reset that. So think of this button here, which is on the background layer and shared across every screen, will be our trigger point. So I'm going to create an animation. So going back, selecting all of those, we're going to animate the X property. And an animation is simply a change of a value over time. So in Storyboard, that value can be just about anything you see in the properties panel here. Certainly X, Y coordinates, width and height, values, so the path of images, text content, alpha values, anything like that. So a lot of flexibility with what you can do with an animation, and they're very powerful. We also offer a built-in animation timeline. So you can go ahead, start laying out your animation in pieces, and then tweak it in a visual manner. And you can go to that here and create a new animation, but we also have a way to bootstrap our animations for us. So if you were to go ahead, hit toggle recording animation, you can see my border here is highlighted in red, says recording frame 1. And I go back and select my cells, and then I'm going to move them all back to 0. I'm going to click the toggle button again up top. It's going to prompt us to give our animation a name. So I'm going to say menu open. And what this is doing here is simply encapsulating all the changes we made and then bootstrapping the timeline for us. So it's a very easy way to kickstart a really neat animation. So I just set the frame rate to 60 frames a second, nice and smooth. And then I also said use absolute values. So we can see when we're in our animation timeline, and you'll notice the content in the model was reset, that we are moving all of these elements from -290 to 0. And you can preview that. So we have a button there to preview where it sort of allows you to step through the frames, stuff like that. But, in this case, it's just linear. It's not very exciting. So I'm going to go ahead, close that down, and make a few tweaks and changes. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of my cells, and instead of a linear easing curve, I'm going to go ahead and give it an ease in out, so it has more of a elastic fluid movement. And that's it's okay, but again, we want to do a little bit better. So we're going to go back. We're going to select some of our elements, and I want to create a nice staggered effect. So if I drag these out, deselect, and start pulling them down, so you'll see, cell 1 followed by cell 2 are going to pop in. And I'm just doing this freehand here. So again, it's not super precise, but again, it's a little bit more intuitive than if you had to write this out through script and code. So we've got our little staircase effect right there. If I were to preview that again, you can see here, if we reverse it, everything pops in nice and cleanly. So, that's a little bit more interesting. It's a pretty fast animation, so the last thing I'll do is I'll just scale that out. So we can scale our animation and say instead of 1100 milliseconds, why don't we just go 1500, so a second and a half. And that, adjusted all of those elements evenly. And we'll save that. And if I press our film strip icon, you can see here now we have our animation. So we can go ahead and use that. Same way we triggered a screen transition. Again, see here, we're going to bind an action, right click, add an action, touch, and in this case, an animation. We simply select our menu, open animation that we just created. We can play with some of these options. I'm going to select the cleanup option. So I don't want it to automatically clean up after it runs. And that is simply because I want to be able to reverse the animation. So after it opens, we have the ability here, you see this property to reverse it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finish. And then if we select our main cell over here, and I'll move this just to show you, that's the one with our X. We're going to go ahead and reverse the animation when the user clicks that button. It's pretty simple. Select our animation, menu open. We'll set the progress to be 100%, so it's at the end, and reverse. Say finish, save, run our application. We have our nice pop out, and then close it down. So again, lots of neat behavior with only a few clicks. The other thing that's interesting is because that animation was bound on a control that's shared across screens, I can invoke that animation on any screen that I'm on. So I only had to do the binding once, but I can reuse that work and that behavior. So again, pretty neat. I can build up an animation, get a feel for it, prototype the the UI vision and experience without really having to write any code. And then, this UI is okay, but you'll notice there's sort of some placeholder assets. The icon isn't the cleanest here. The background, obviously just solid gray, doesn't really look the best. So, we've built up some behavior, but, let's say our design team have a new look for us, some new skin or some missing assets that they're dropping in. I can go ahead, re-import a design file. Go ahead and I'll browse to that PSD, import that, and then we can work our way through, and the tool's going to go ahead, compare the content, and you can see here, we've got our background, new content. So if I select that, you can see what it looks like. Definitely cleaner, nicer screen. We don't have that gray with some of that noise down there. Same thing for some of the other elements. So in this case, on our one of our settings screen, instead of this green, we've got this blue. So we'll go ahead and select that. And you can go through, pick and choose what you like, what you don't. This basically helps you realize what changes are coming in, if you want to accept them, if you want to merge them, replace images, and even positioning of content. So again, it's a very powerful tool, and definitely allows you to go ahead, reskin, reposition a UI, but then not lose any of the work that you've done. So again, if I save this, run our application again, you can see here we still have our animation, and we still have our screen transitions, and we haven't lost any of the work and the effort. So again, very powerful workflow. We definitely really want to encourage everyone to embrace iteration, accept new content, bring it in, and this workflow helps you do that without incurring much time in terms of development and cost. So hopefully you enjoyed that demo. You saw the benefits of working with a tool that allows you to iterate and evolve your design. And if we kind of recap some of the content that we covered today, you can see here that you can really help accelerate your development. Since Storyboard is a tool that allows you to build production applications, but at the same time integrate with iteration and design tooling, you can really hit the ground running. It's also, completely hardware and OS agnostic, where, you can start importing your content from tools like Photoshop or Sketch, start creating your behaviors, adding your animations, and your transitions, and building up the flow of the UI before your hardware is even ready or even selected. So you could be doing this with a few different development boards that you're evaluating on the side and testing on all of them, or maybe you're waiting for the device to be fabricated and get your own custom board built and ready to go. Either way, you don't have to wait to start designing and building the UI. As you saw, once you start iterating and you start getting that feedback in front of people, that's where the iterations become crucial, and that's something that we build right into the workflow in the tool. As you saw, we created an animation, we hooked up some screen transitions, but we were able to bring in a new design that had some new colors, new themes, and then simply drop that on top. We didn't have to rewire anything. The tool compared the content within it and merged it in and allowed us to go about our day-to-day fairly quickly. So, I can compare this with other products I've worked on in the past, and when big changes came down having to do with the layout and the theme, this was usually not a light effort. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I really enjoyed getting a chance to show this off and speak to you today. But when you're building up your product and you're starting to either evaluate, create prototypes, or start development, just remember that it's always beneficial to get on your hardware, quickly and frequently if you are having it available, and if you can start testing and getting in front of people. But then also realize that GUI design, it's a process. You're not going to get your perfect design right the first time. So get it in front of people, take that feedback, bring it back into your design group and start iterating on that and bring in new content and changes. So really, really embrace that as part of your development cycle, and you'll have a much better product for it. And then finally, if you are looking to give a new tool a try, we definitely encourage you to go to our website, download a free trial of Storyboard. It's a fully unlocked version of the tool for 30 days, and start playing around and building up your UI prototypes and seeing how it might fit into your workflow. So thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed the talk today and the presentation, and really look forward to hearing about some of your products that you're working on and new ideas. So thank you very much, and hope you guys have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.